all counselors except for Lori Osher are present. And before we open the meeting, I think Cheryl wanted to just address some things that happened over the weekend. So.
Yeah, pretty much all week. So I have been asked on Facebook, which I will not respond to put out a statement about my reasoning behind not in favor on Monday night. And I'm going to put out a statement and I'm going to put it on the record. And here is my reasoning, and I've written it down and I'm going to read it. And then it takes about 2 minutes. And then if anyone wants to have a conversation, that's absolutely not a problem with me. So on Monday evening, and this is not just to council, this is to the community that I love. There's been some pretty insidious remarks about me and my motives. On Monday evening, June 15th, per policy and procedure with last-minute additions to a council agenda, I was required to cast a vote on whether or not I wanted to put this item on the agenda, a Juneteenth proclamation by the town of Orono. My vote was not in favor, which meant we could still have a discussion, just not that night. This is not the first time that a last-minute item has been voted down and become part of a future discussion. All council members are entitled to this vote. The comments posted to the Town of Orono's Facebook page because of the vote to hold off discussion until we could have more time to deliberate and understand the nature of proclamation was hurtful. And some of it was compelling enough for those who know me and those who love me to come to my defense. My statement tonight is a response to what happened later. First, I will never engage in verbal volleyball on a platform like Facebook. I'm appalled at the level of hate speech, the fighting, the misinformation that is allowed on this platform, and I will not be complicit in this. To stay away from Facebook is my personal choice, my personal activism. I don't ask anyone to make the choices I make. Secondly, my reasons for not wanting to go into a discussion after a 2.5-hour public hearing on our town budget is simply that producing a proclamation for me requires a longer, more thoughtful and considerate understanding of what this means. In an effort to create this town document, there should be an expectation that all council members are involved, that the community has weighed in, and that this document reflects the values, attitudes, and necessary understanding that comes with deliberation and thoughtful discussion. Currently, council has no protocols in place, no policy, no process for a substantive proclamation. In an effort to be equitable, when we adhere to process and policy, we define an official meaning, and we also help identify the significance and the connection of the proclamation to the mandate and strategic goals of the town of Orono. Pride Month is supported by many community members who worked hard to make it happen, who donated funding, who wrote letters, who hung flags and painted windows. The recognition of a proclamation came after months of preparing. None of this happened prior to the Juneteenth proclamation. In a larger context, Juneteenth has been officially recognized by the state of Maine since 2011. We should celebrate it, and maybe next spring have some official planned celebration. Again, this was why the larger discussion than time allowed on Monday night. I love Orono, I value perspectives, and I am openly giving you permission to call me, to email me whenever you wonder about me, who I am, or what my intent might be. If you want social justice, be the model. If you want to try to jump to conclusions or assumptions about who a person is, then assume the best. And let's have those deeper conversations about how we can continue to make our own community, the town of Orono, not Portland, not Atlanta, not even Bangor, but here, safe, healthy, and awesome place to grow up. And until then, how about we take this time in history to actually look around Orono and see what's going on with our own community and ask ourselves, where can I be of help today? Because that's the true community support that we need. And that's my statement. But you know what? My personal feelings is, come on, guys. I'm 61 years old. Do you think that in all of those years, in the many years that I have lived in Orono and worked in Orono and raised a child in Orono, that my racism wouldn't have come out by now? I mean, really, the only reason that I voted not in favor was not to have the discussion that night. I didn't vote that Juneteenth was an awful thing and we shouldn't do it. That was not what the vote was about. The vote was about putting it on the agenda, a last minute item, after we knew that we were going to have a longer meeting than normal. And we worked really hard on this budget. We met sometimes 3 times a week, and I felt like it was just pushed aside for something that was, that council hadn't had any prior knowledge, hadn't had any deliberation whatsoever. We can't just write a proclamation, or one person write a proclamation and put it out there and expect that to be our process. So I submit that we have a conversation about policy, and I think it's on our agenda at some point. And then let's get this down, and let's get some policy, let's get some procedure, let's get some process, and then we'll know what we're doing and when we're doing it, and how to proceed in a way that's equitable for everybody. And that is my
Thank you, Cheryl.
statement.
And just to clarify, the proclamation was drafted in an effort to move it forward. It wasn't necessarily one person's agenda or anything. I don't think you meant that, but I just wanted to clarify.
Okay.
So appreciate that you made the statement. Does council want to make any other statements, or should we move to the next item on the agenda? Lori?
Thank you, Cheryl, for saying that, and I am disappointed that there was so much backlash to you, because that's a part of the procedure, and I thought that that was a reasonable thing for you to say that wasn't the time to discuss it. And I think that our town could do more to show how supportive we are of doing the work to be anti-racist, but just making a Juneteenth proclamation is not really it's not the meat of it. It's a nice thing to say, and so I felt like we didn't lose very much by not discussing it, and I'm sorry to see even the Maine Beacon, took up a stab at you. I don't know if you've seen that article, and I think that wasn't very nice.
I didn't know that. Thank you so much. I will have to look that up.
Dan Newman of the Maine Beacon talked about, ended his article this week with Orono's not voting on Juneteenth, and I think that we work hard. And we spent a lot of time, and I thought it was well written, and I really want to thank Megan for writing it. And I think that we'll have a chance to talk about it in the future. And we need to all practice, including the people who are on Facebook, how to communicate in a way that's not hurtful to other people. And
I have offered my telephone number. I have offered my email. People can contact me anytime. I am interpersonal all the way.
I'd just really quickly like to say that, because maybe it wasn't your intent, Cheryl, but some of the things that you said felt like they were a little bit pointed at me. There were no nefarious reasons behind what I did. It was motivated by 2 things. First, yes, council received 1 letter from 1 citizen, but I know I'm one of multiple counselors who received lots of feedback from people in the community saying, well, what are you guys doing? What are you doing? You're not doing anything. What are you doing? And then we got that email, and it got me thinking that, well, I'm not sure whether council wants to take this up, and I don't want anyone to dump it on Sophie's lap over the weekend. So why don't I'll whip something up just so that council has it to talk about. And part of why I wanted to talk about it, and it's ironic that we weren't allowed to, I wanted to talk about it for exactly the reason that both Cheryl and Lori, both of you mentioned, which is it has never occurred to us to talk about it. Yes, making a Juneteenth proclamation is nice, but maybe meaningless if it's not followed up by any action. I agree with that completely. And that was kind of what I wanted to talk about by bringing it up and saying, guys, don't you think it's probably wrong that it took, what happened with George Floyd and all the protests, and then community members contacting us directly and saying, what are you doing about things, for it to even occur to us to do something so simple as just a formal recognition of a holiday that should be recognized nationally. So I was hoping to have that conversation and say, yeah, maybe these proclamations don't do a lot. And also bad on us that it didn't even occur to us to do the bare minimum. And so I was really hopeful we could have that conversation and then make a promise that we would be more thoughtful and think about everyone in our community going forward. Because I know I have my viewpoint, where I am in my life, my blinders, my biases, and I'll own them and admit them and promise to work on them. But it didn't occur to me until I got that letter from a resident to even think about a Juneteenth proclamation. And I'll own that. That was wrong. And so I was hoping that we could have that conversation at a very public, high profile meeting, but things didn't.
I think we can have that conversation. I think that conversation needs to, but I felt like the Pride Month proclamation was diminished, and those people did so much work, you know, for that. We talked about it. I felt like the budget that we had worked so hard on was diminished. And, you know, and possibly if there was no proclamation to deliberate, that possibly we might have been able to, but my stance was no, I'm not going to take this to the end of a council meeting and then vote on a proclamation that we never contributed to. You know, council never contributed to that. So, you know, so possibly, you know, so maybe we could have had an email out, or I don't know, something, Megan, but just to get hit with that, you know, at a 7 o'clock to 9:30 meeting, and a proclamation that had just no input. And I was really, really disturbed. I was really disturbed by that.
As one of the people who worked very hard on the budget and also worked very hard on the Pride Month celebrations in town, I don't feel that the conversation would have diminished it. We can agree to disagree and move on. I just wanted to put it out there that I think the conversation is more important than the proclamation, and the action is the most important thing.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Not wanting to have that conversation does not make me a racist.
I did not say that. I did not say that, and I don't condone anyone saying that.
No. Okay, well, it is on a future agenda item, and some of the work plan, I think, discusses this. So why don't we start with the FY21 revenue and expense budget revenue reviews for year-to-date activity and year-end forecast.
I give the caveat the same every time we do that, and that is that I'm giving my best estimate. It's a crystal ball. We still will be receiving bills and some revenue that will come in as late as the end of August that will book back into FY20. But based on what department heads are reporting and our collections, we actually look much better than I had anticipated for the end of FY20. I sent people, counselors, an email at on Friday or Saturday. It all blends together for me, letting you know that we received our revenue sharing a day early, and it booked in at $165,000, which was well above what I had anticipated. So we actually ended the year over collecting about $30,000 of revenue sharing. And if you were able to read that email, my caution to you is this is exactly what the state said was going to happen, because they are paying the FY20 revenue sharing distributions based on projections and what they had budgeted as opposed to actual collections. So we will begin to see what revenue sharing is truly going to look like when we receive our July 2020 distribution. And that should give me something to then base some better future forecasts on. We also, I want to thank our community because they have certainly come to the table. We've received a little over $90,000 of excise tax since we sent out the postcards. So I think we're still going to be under collected on excise tax. I know that Councilor Perry advocated with the auditor extensively to be able to capture some of that back into FY20. So we will still try to split the revenue to know which vehicles come in July and August. that were for March, April, well, essentially anything before the end of May. Because June, we see a lot of June, expiring June registrations that get paid in July. So we wouldn't want to pull those back because that will impact next year's. Am I making sense? All right. So as we've talked about, staff did not issue an expenditure freeze. I instead said, if you can possibly not expend it and still meet the mission of your department, then let's hold off. And we had some expenditures for things that we hadn't anticipated around COVID-19. I am assuming that we are going to take all of the infrastructure funding that is left and put that into our infrastructure reserve account. We had talked about doing that. So even with that, it looks like we will be under expended by approximately $715,000. We will be under collected by approximately $150,000, which should lead to a budgetary surplus that today looks like it will be about $565,000. So that is good news. The FY20 budget called for approximately $1.2 million of fund balance to be used in the operation of FY20, which means that instead of the 1.2 million, we would see a decrease of approximately 700,000. So the other caution I was give. Oh, yep, go ahead.
Excuse me, Sophie. When you say 1,243,000 in fund balance, you're talking about reserve funds as well as undesignated fund balance. And yeah, gotcha.
So this is based on the budgetary, this is budget to actual. There will be adjustments that are done at the end of FY20 and also by the auditors that have to do with the accrual of certain liabilities, vacation time liabilities, deferred tax revenue. If we're not bringing in tax revenue as much tax revenue at the end of the year, we actually have to write down our regular revenue for that. Those changes happen every year, which is why I give you a number and then it changes. Sometimes it changes for the good and you're happy, and other times it changes not so much for the good and we lament it. But those changes shouldn't be any more significant than we have seen in previous years. So that's what I have at this point. When we meet next week, I have the creation of a couple of reserve accounts that I'd like to talk with council about. We've talked about the infrastructure reserve. I want to talk about police tuition. So instead of carrying forward funds every year, we simply drop the $15,000 that we're required to have by contract into a reserve fund and then replenish that through the operating budget if we need to on an annual basis. And there was one other, the other reserve that I wanted to talk about was we have $20,000 that we had set aside for the IT, the cable restructuring in town hall. The date that we got to do that work was not until the middle of July. So my suggestion to council would be that we take the not to exceed number and dump that amount of money, transfer that money into the IT reserve account so that we can simply pay for that out of the IT reserve in the coming year and not see those big, trying to get away from those really big carry forward numbers. That makes sense?
Yep. Good.
More questions. I want to make sure this was, Cindy, this was something you had asked for, and I want to just make sure I've got you what you were looking for.
Yep, makes good sense to me. So we're cleaning up. We're going to end without having, my biggest concern was we didn't want to backfill with the new budget. And so it sounds like that's not what we're doing.
Good.
I'm hoping that we'll see a little bit, if you consider that we like took everything out of the undesignated, that $350,000 out of the undesignated fund at the beginning of the year to make the budget work. I'm hoping we'll be able to put a little bit back in at the end of this year. So it will still be a net decrease, but I think it won't be as big as what you had budgeted, is my hope.
That's good.
My other question for you is just, or a statement is, as we go through the budget, one of the things that the audit looks at year end is our fiduciary, our stewardship of funds, meaning when we budget for something, did we go way over or way under budget? There are a couple of places that's really easy for me to explain, and other ones where we did a little bit of, gee, we had more expense in the town office building account than we had in the Keith Anderson account, but they're two separate cost centers, and the only way that we can change budget is to have council approve that change. So on the 29th, I hope to come with a couple of those budget adjustments, not as much as we've had in the past, but a few.
Lori, did you have something?
I very much appreciate Sophie giving us the details of where money is moving, but I found myself a little lost. You mentioned something about the $115,000 for police something training.
15,000.
$15,000 by the collective bargaining agreement requires that we saved $5,000 a year for several years to maintain a balance of $15,000 in an account for the police department to get reimbursed for college classes or for degree work. We normally carry that money forward every year and then add through the budget process. If somebody took a class and it's $1,500 that we expended, we'd add $1,500 to the operating budget in the coming year to that. My fear is that sometime we're going to miss that and let that lapse to fund balance, and it makes more sense to put that in a reserve and not have to carry that money forward every year.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Okay. Anybody else have any questions or comments on this? No? Thank you very much, Sophie. Appreciate it. Moving on to the discussion of the FY21 municipal WPCF and capital budget adoptions.
So I put this item on the agenda because we went through the public hearing and I didn't get a lot of feedback, but we would be scheduling the adoption of these budgets next week, and it's a lot easier if we wanted to make changes to do that in this forum so that I can change all the documents, because that's really hard to do on the fly and get it right. So I just wanted to place this on here to make sure that you guys were okay with the budget as presented. And then I want to talk to you a little bit about a couple of tweaks that I am going to suggest.
Anyone have anything?
I'm fine with the budget as presented. I think we did a lot of work and made a number of adjustments, and I'm happy to go forward with it.
Yep. I didn't hear anything from the public that would tell me that we needed to change anything. So I think we're good.
Okay, so I have a couple of thoughts if council's in general okay with the numbers. I thought that when we put the order together, we would make a note ahead of all of those orders so that people looking at the agenda would see that council is adopting this budget, but may very well have to come back in the
Right.
prior to tax commitment to review it and revise it, just so it's out there for the world to see. The second thing that I'd like to do.
Sophie, so that will be a valid order though, if we.
No, it's more of a notation. You know how sometimes we just put notations on the agenda, like if an item has been tabled or, you know, just something that gives the world notice that,
But that won't be in an order. So the budget
No.
will stand unless we take affirmative action to change it in August.
Yep. So my thought is that when we get a better sense of the revenue predictions, that I'd come back to council, and if it's right on what I've forecasted, we can all have ice cream. And if it's not, then we would look at either more money and how do you want to deal with that, or less money and how do you want to deal with that?
Sophie, I think the idea of a note is a good idea. I hope we could say in that note, due to the uncertainty of state revenue, so they know why we're talking about the possibility of coming back to the budget.
I think that's a great idea. I've made a note.
Great.
The second thing is I'd like to change our format a little bit in the budget orders. In the past, we've shown economic development as a breakout of within the order for the general fund. I would like us to pull that off and show that as individual approvals for the various TIF development programs. And the reason for that is to make it very clear that council's giving me the authority to expend X amount of money from the downtown and transit-oriented TIF. It ties to the financial statements much better that way, if that is all right with you guys.
Yep.
Okay. And those were my only kind of tweaks.
Good. Anybody have any comments or questions on this before we move on? Hearing none, seeing none, I will move on to the FY fee schedule, FY21 fee schedule and annual budget related orders.
So just double checking that you're fine with the fee schedule?
Yep.
Yep.
Okay. All right, I don't see any no's. All right.
I don't see any
And
notes either.
the budget related orders, still planning to do 2 tax payments in the year. I'm thinking that we'll probably go late September and early February. The only thing that might change that is if council is still concerned about revenue sharing. I'd like to give people a month between 4 weeks between when they get their tax bill and when it's due. That just kind of seems not like a bill you want to give somebody and expect them to pay in a week. And the interest, we would do the highest interest that is allowed by state law, which I believe is 8% this year. And that would leave us at 4% paid on paid abatements that we have to refund. And that's just the minimum that we would be able to pay under state law. So I'm assuming you're still looking for us to do the maximum and the minimum.
Sophie, have any more poverty abatements come in at all?
So I've got 2. I've got one that is here and pending, and I'd like to talk to council a little bit about when we want to hold our council meeting for July, and also kind of if you're willing to maybe meet an hour before that or an hour after that so that we can have separate executive sessions for people. So I'm expecting one more to come in this week. If it doesn't come in this week, then we would wait till next month. We don't have any foreclosures happening. So we don't have to worry about that time crunch, which is normally what we're worried about.
Yeah, thank you, Sophie.
So the interest rate, Sophie, that's the same as what we had last year.
I think it was 9% last year. and went to 8, or it's 8% and it's going to 7. It's down 1%.
Oh, we did the maximum last year.
Yep.
And we historically have done that for many years.
Yep.
Okay.
That's all I have for those. Just making sure, double check, because we haven't had a lot of time together to review things.
No, I think we did good.
I like it.
All right. Moving on to discussion, creation of an ad hoc council environment committee. Cheryl had brought this up several months ago, and I think before COVID actually. And then COVID hit, so we haven't had a chance to really get to it. But Cheryl's written out some things that the mission and what it would accomplish. So Cheryl, you want to briefly discuss it?
Sure. Yep. We've been in conversation, Sophie and I have been in conversation, and we're thinking that this might be a good time for just a pilot year. I kind of was thinking that this was a necessary committee, an ad hoc committee, to kind of vet some of our environmental issues that come up that don't really have a place on any of our other economic development or comprehensive plan committees, and just to kind of vet some things that come through before we go to a full council meeting. One of the things that that brought this to my attention was working with the Natural Resources Council of Maine, and there was an opportunity for our municipality to generate some revenue through a producer stewardship program. We really didn't have a place to talk about that. It wasn't really a, there was not really a, I don't know, it felt like there was kind of a gap between vetting and council meetings. So I kind of went online. I looked at a lot of different communities, different places. I couldn't find anything that was our size, but I thought possibly we could tailor it to our size. I was also asked or charged to find 3 primary tasks that might be that we might be able to complete in a year, in this pilot year, before we decide to move on. And so typically a community has a climate action plan, and this is just a working title. It acts as an advisory body, an action committee reporting to town council, and then the responsibilities. So one of the responsibilities of this new committee would be to create a municipal climate or an environmental action plan. I have different strategies that it might address. Some of these things overlap, and that's okay, because this is just a discussion. But these are some of the things that might come up that this type of a committee could vet, or subcommittee could vet prior to bringing it to full council. I don't know if I need to read everything. I think you could probably read down through the list. I'm open to suggestions or discussion. And so here's, I don't know. Should I read this whole thing for people?
No, I think everybody's got it in the background.
Okay, thank you. And then, so create a municipal climate/environmental action plan, gather and discuss in the bold, and disseminate information pertinent to decreasing the municipality's environmental footprint, and to convert this information to usable, actionable strategies. That would be setting some short-term and some long-term goals. And then educate, create a page on the Orono website that keeps community members apprised of local environmental issues, programs, volunteer opportunities. And there's some state and federal environmental changes and regs that that would be nice to just kind of keep apprised of. Currently, I think we're having an issue, if you've been following the Bangor Daily News, with our waste management program, and that might be something that an environmental committee could kind of be on top of and monitor so that, or, you know, recycling program or composting program that, just to keep the public informed of what's going on. We talked about a committee composition, and Sophie can tell us, we talked about 3 or 4 different compositions that might happen. We have some Orono residents who are interested in serving as technical support to this, you know, to this pretty much new committee. And then like I have committee meetings 1 time per month. I don't want it to be time intensive or create a situation where people are running from meeting to meeting. And then I've just got some different, this is all brainstorming, different tasks that on the next page that we might, that this particular committee might be able to keep abreast of and continue to monitor and to discuss and to bring to the table as appropriate. So just kind of hoping to get some feedback, and it's new. It's not something that a lot of municipalities are doing, but I think they're moving in that direction. And the state of Maine also has a Climate Action Council who have been kind of tagging municipalities for responses and you know, to what, you know, it's kind of like what they're doing in their town. That's Janet Mills, that's the Governor Mills kind of mandate or initiative. So in a nutshell.
Okay. Does anybody have any discussion about this? No, go ahead, Terry.
I do. Can you hear me?
Yep.
So I'm hoping to put this into some other space. Personally, for me, I get that it's a good thing that we should be looking environmentally. Whether or not it needs to have another committee, I personally don't want another committee. I've got enough committees to have to kind of navigate the stuff. So if we could fit it into something else somewhere, that would make life a bit easier, I think, for most of us.
It wouldn't be a committee. If Terry, you didn't want to be on it, it wouldn't be a committee you'd have to be on. It would be a voluntary situation. You wouldn't have to be on a committee that you didn't want to be on.
Okay, great. Secondly, I'm okay with it if it's a separate thing, if it doesn't have to take up more staff time from the town. And that's another big issue, because we're now behind on projects. Throwing another item in there is possibly they're already stressed out. And as long as it doesn't create more work, and that you know, whomever that committee head is can do the legwork and do all the work, fine. But I just don't want to throw any extra work at our town either.
I think it's important. I think it's great to have this sort of brought up like this. But I absolutely understand Terry's points too, you know, and I think they're very valid. So I'm thinking about this is where I am. Just how's that for a vague point? And of course now I'm getting pinged here, sorry. But yeah, I would need some more time to think about this. Again, Cheryl, thank you for doing the work. Thank you for bringing this up. It is important, and I think it aligns with Orono's values very nicely. But again, I am concerned with what it would take to make it get up and work and the impact it may have on our staff. So I'm still chewing on it, okay?
Yeah, I mean, we have proposals for 2 new committees on this agenda tonight. And when I think about that, especially these 2 particular issues, environmental and social justice issues are very important to this community. They are very important to every single one of us on council. And I know that staff understands that those are a priority for the community and council as well. I guess the thing that I get kind of concerned about is when we have these proposals for new, more, it's not to say that they're not bad ideas and that we shouldn't be doing them, but we don't ever really have a very specific conversation about how we're going to prioritize these. So for example, if this were to become a formal committee like our other committees, then I think it's only fair to the taxpayers that we're having a conversation, a specific conversation about how are we prioritizing this, and what are we reprioritizing in order to make this happen if that's what council wants? So staff time equals taxpayer dollars, and we hear every single month staff is stretched thin, thin, thin. And we just got through a budget process where we're thinking, how are we going to do all the things that we already are trying to do? So we would have to have a very upfront conversation about what's falling off the ladder for us to put this up. Or are we telling taxpayers that we are willing to commit to potentially raising taxes if need be to support more staff to support these projects? So we never have specific financial conversations about these proposals, and I think that we need to. It's important, you know. And if we determine then that we are not going to go the formal committee route, then talking about things like making it a part of the community development committee, even just beginning with an overarching environmental policy that could guide staff more specifically. I know that staff understands that we care about the environment, but we could be more specific about that and give very clear guidance about how we would like them to approach decision-making and how we will approach decision-making. So what I'm saying is I'm in that kind of boat with Terry and Sam. Like, I like the idea of doing this and focusing on this issue and on the issue of social justice. Both of these are very important things, but we need to talk about how we're paying for it, how we're prioritizing it, and all of those details that are not sexy, but they're important.
I think one of the things that came up when Cheryl originally proposed this, one of the things that came up for me was that there's a lot of things in this realm that need some real technical research, which I don't think staff can do, but I think the idea was that this committee could go out and do it and be charged to do it, not staff to do it. And then the question would be whether this committee would answer right to a council workshop or whether it would then go through, you know, community development or comp plan. But I think the idea was more like a team that would vet some of this stuff, so that, because we like you said, Megan, we don't have time to get through deep in the weeds on all of this. So that's where, that was my thought as the proposal, I thought that might be helpful to commit to council.
So did the term subcommittee come up? I mean, is that such a thing? I mean, to impart this with a specific mandate and a clear kind of agenda, at least as far as topics to touch on. I don't know if that's just, Rose by any other name, right? It's still a committee, but it's just located and parked under something. I don't know if that's an option or if that makes sense in some way.
Yeah, I'm going to let Sophie take this, but yeah, we did talk about that. So go ahead. So
I will just say that Cheryl and I've talked quite a bit about this, because just like you've alluded to, Megan, she's very concerned about overstretching staff. And what I'm excited about with this is if we have a limited number of counselors on this subcommittee, it becomes more of a working group. And it's about getting technical expertise that we don't normally have at the table, and some excited people who would do some research. Over the last few years, it's felt like we've had very much a hit or miss when it comes to environmental issues. We want to do this, we want to do that, we want to do something else. And what would really help staff is if we could look at it in a more comprehensive way. And Cheryl, talking with Cheryl, I think that action plan kind of becomes a framework. But I also think that having a place for us as a staff to come together to talk about operational issues that some might rise to the level of needing to go to the operations committee or the community development committee or the finance committee, that it provides us an opportunity to look at it in a more holistic way with some technical expertise that I would not have at my fingertips normally. So I think the way it's being proposed is one that kind of mirrors the way we had talked about dealing with the with Pride Month coming up, which is essentially a committee that is helping staff come up with a plan that then comes to council for consideration. So just my thought. I think a lot of work has gone into developing this in a way that will not add a lot, but rather will help us become more cohesive and hopefully maybe even a little bit more efficient in the way we're approaching the environment. And I think there are some things that would be nice to get down on paper that would guide staff's decision making in a way that, you know, for example, while we all know it, and I say it, especially at MRC meetings, that we don't want to be landfilling, it would be really nice if the town had a policy position on that. Just saying. Things like that would be helpful, I think.
What would a next step be from this point moving in that kind of direction? What would that next step look like?
If that's for me, I think if council was interested in putting this committee together, I think the next step would be to decide who would be on it from council. So is it kind of like liaisons from council that get appointed? Cheryl has indicated that if this went and council was so inclined, she would be happy to function as the operating chair so that I'm not having to lead this, which would be incredibly helpful. And then I would think that we would pull together some nominations for who should serve, and the council would approve those or not, you know, do its normal appointment process. The first thing I could see this committee doing would be to sit down and very carefully construct the action items for this year. Very clearly, succinctly, here are the things we want to get done this year, and here's how we think we're going to make that happen. And then at the beginning, I probably would bring the related staff in. I would see that as the assistant manager, the public works director, the WPCF superintendent would be probably the top ones that would be most affected, to give some thought as we brainstorm that plan. And then I think we would bring that plan back to council and make sure, or committee, to make sure that that works, and then go forth from there. I think it's taking work that we're already trying to do and giving it more of a foundation and putting it on paper. And if somebody else is gonna kind of take the lead with that, I think that would be really helpful for me.
And where it is such a newbie, it's possible to, you know, to organically grow as, you know, get started and then see what direction it goes. But I would be open to just a pilot year and coming back, you know, just a pilot year coming back and having another, another discussion, what worked, what didn't work. I mean, just like you would grow, you know, any kind of thing organically.
And to see whether it, at that point, whether it naturally folds back into one of the standing committees or whether it works better on its own.
Yep.
Yeah, exactly.
So, any other thoughts or comments?
Well, we do have some interested residents. We have some people from the University of Maine who are interested in seeing this kind of develop.
I thank you, Cheryl and Sophie,
Okay.
for bringing this up. I think it's very well crafted. From my experience as working with the Environmental Priorities Coalition, which is when I was the president of a nonprofit, environmental nonprofit. There's a group of nonprofits called the Environmental Priorities Coalition that advocate for or against, depending on in laws, policies that would impact the environment. And I was impressed with the towns that had these kinds of committees, because then they were able to also participate, even though they could come through the municipal, but because usually it was citizen committees, and it gets, we certainly have the town with citizens that are environmental scientists and care a lot about the environment. So I think it fits with the profile of our town. I don't think it'll be, in the past, Sophie has mentioned that it's hard to get people to volunteer for some of the committees that we're trying to staff, or she's trying to staff. And I think that at least for this first year for a trial, I don't know that that's going to be a problem. And I want to support that we go forward with this. Thank you very much for organizing it.
Thank you, Lori.
So Sophie, would this go on a agenda? And so we would have a formal vote to establish it?
I think that would make sense. My question for council is, do you want to do that on the 29th, or would you want to wait till a regular council meeting, which would be the 13th of July?
I vote for the 13th myself.
I would agree, Cindy, for the 13th.
Yeah, I'm good. I'm good with the 13th too, Sophie.
And are you all right with Cheryl kind of reaching out to some folks, or how do you want to create the membership? Because that is important that council would appoint. It gives it a different flavor. I think that's important.
Yeah, I guess I kind of would like to establish the committee first,
Okay.
or make sure that it gets established through a proper vote, and then we could invite committee people to be nominated to the committee.
Is there a cap on what's the amount of members in said committee?
So Cheryl and I talked about that, on a technical basis, Sam, the council decides that. It could be any number. But we were thinking that if this was truly going to be a working group, that we probably wouldn't want more than 3 or 4 community members on it. Correct, Cheryl?
Yeah.
We're looking for people who have specific technical expertise. For example, one of the people that I work with, or that the town works with frequently, is Dan Dixon from campus, who does a lot of their environmental carbon footprint work. And I think he would be a wonderful resource for us to have.
I like the idea of a limited number of the committee. I also like the idea of nominating and then having a discussion about figuring that out, because this is something people are passionate about. I think you could easily get 40 people wanting to be on this, and that would.
Yeah. Wait, I keep unmuting. 40 people do not want to be on. I'm a little, I want to say the nomination process, I don't know if I'm not sure if that would be the first way that I would start, because I think, possibly later on, would it be possible to just invite by invitation some people in the community? I don't know if they're gonna, if a brand new committee, if people are gonna want to sit for nomination and discussion, and I'm not sure if that's how that would play out very well, but open to suggestions.
I think I agree with Cindy, just planning a committee, making a plan for it, and setting goals for the year, or something perhaps we could do, and then opening it up for people to self-nominate, because you never know who you're going to get. If we only ask people that we already know, then we miss the opportunity for someone who might be fabulous that we don't know who they are. And so it may be, as we found in other committees, that one person self-nominates, we're like, yay, thank you. But I think opening it and giving people the opportunity to self-nominate, then reviewing, that gives us the widest opportunity for people in our town to participate.
I would also.
I agree with that process.
Yeah, I mean, I would like it to mirror what we do with other boards,
Yep.
committees that involve citizens or community members, is that, so that it doesn't seem like we're handpicking or excluding anyone, that it's the same across the board.
Thank you.
Cheryl, Cheryl, thank you.
Terry, you're frozen.
Am I frozen? Can you hear me?
Now I
There you
can.
go, Terry.
Can you hear me?
A little
Sounded
bit.
like you were singing.
You're
Bad
glitching.
internet.
No, we lost him again.
You might have
I
to.
will probably lean on. Do I have to get out and back in?
Yeah, I don't know.
I can hear you. You keep coming in and out.
Sounds like you're being auto-tuned, Terry.
Oh, it's bad internet down on Mill Street. So I just wanted to say, if I'll try to get it in before I go out. Thank you, Cheryl, because but I will lean on you to kind of get your help with understanding some of this stuff, because a lot of times we get stuff thrown out, and you've been doing the research on this, so it'll help me under. A lot of times when stuff comes in and not useful. And a lot of times we don't have the money. A lot of it's
We're not hearing you, Terry.
important to have the information. Let me get out of this.
I think Terry's happy for you to do some work for it so that he can benefit from the work that you've proposed. So we'll put together a formal order for the July agenda, and then we can have further discussion if anybody comes up with something that they've thought about in the meantime. So, all right. Thank you very much, Cheryl, for all that work.
Yes. Can I ask you just one question before we move on? What do you need from me for the formal agenda, for the July agenda?
I don't
Do you
think
anything? Okay.
I don't think so. Yeah.
We're good with what you've given us. If anything, if people are nervous about the scope being too broad, then maybe we could work at pulling it back a little bit for this year. But you know, I think you put an awful lot of work into creating the background for it.
Right. I'm good with this, and the you know, this is a primarily just kind of a brainstorming thing. So, you know, clipping stuff out, you know, figuring out what goes where and all of that fun stuff. I'm okay with that. I was just trying to just throw a bunch of stuff out there that a committee like this might be responsible for.
I imagine it'll be sort of a natural filtration as this takes off too, of what's feasible, what works, what has some traction,
Right.
what's something.
Yeah.
But
We just don't know at the moment.
I
But
look forward
thank
to
you,
seeing-
Walter.
I look forward to seeing what comes out of this. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam.
There's
You guys,
Terry.
can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
We can hear you now.
Meg actually suggested I go actually inside, because I was outside trying to do it out there, but But the statement I was trying to make was, Cheryl, I may kind of lean on you to kind of help me understand all the work you've done on this, because I think sometimes where I get buried in stuff is that when things come to us that maybe a human rights thing, or it could be something about environmental, and then it's compared to Portland or to a place that's got funding. And so I don't, you know, we're a very unique space that doesn't have a lot of money. So when we see things, it's like my mind goes to, yeah, we can't be that town. Not that we're bad towns and we don't appreciate it. We just don't have the money. And that's a very important distinction to draw for people to understand. So
No.
I'll lean on you to help with that part.
Exactly, Terry. And my thinking is that this would be tailored to Orono and not, you know, we can take ideas and suggestions and things like that, but it's more tailored. I will always tailor it to Orono's needs and Orono's abilities. And I really don't have any kind of a budgetary thing at the moment. So it might be a possibility to look for some grants. It might be a possibility to look for some municipal revenue somewhere. You know, whatever's out there. I think the Maine Climate Action Council that Governor Mills has put together, you know, might have something for municipalities, but everything's just at an early stage. So I will be super careful not to go into, territory that doesn't fit, is not a good fit for Orono.
Sounds like a plan. Thank you very much. So moving on to the FY19 work plan. And I'm up to suggestions on how to tackle this. Sophie did a great job of giving us where we stand on some of the items that we've done or were in progress. I think the easiest thing to knock off would be the number 3, to make that just a general priority. That eliminates some of our work plan. But I don't know if you want to go through the current projects to see if we want to keep them on there, or if you want to just say, yep, this is the work plan, and let's look at what we're talking about adding on to the work plan. So up for a little direction here.
I think it would be helpful, Cindy. I realize that it's already 5 o'clock, but I think there are some questions that if we could just go through, it will help me plan things, because my next step is to try to bring this back with committee assignments and a timeline so that we can see how this will work, or where we would be bottlenecked. But there are some that I think would be helpful just to get a little bit of input.
Okay. So I'm sorry. So the projects from the FY19 work plan, the first item was the regulating recreational and medical marijuana commercial activity. I think we pushed that pretty far, and then COVID kind of stopped the public hearings. So
the planning board met and gave its recommendations. So I have a planning board memo that should go back to council. They are minor, very, very minor. So I think we would be ready for the next step. And my understanding of the next step, just because it's my understanding does not mean it's correct. But my understanding of the next step was that council was looking to put this out to a referendum, which would mean that we would do it either in November or June, or the following November, March, or June of next year would be the 3 that are coming up. And I kind of want a little bit of feedback from council, because we would want to push out information about this in the months coming up to an election. We wouldn't want to spend a whole bunch of time, as an example, pushing out information in September and October for a November election, when November's coming, if you want to do it in March, as an example, because then we'll have to do it all over again.
And Sophie, this vote is just an opt-in or opt-out vote, correct?
Well, it would be a vote that is adopting the ordinance. So you either adopt the ordinance or you don't adopt the ordinance, which in essence, the ordinance is an opt-in with restrictions.
And has the state completed all of its regs? And that might be a question for Kyle. Are they done?
It is a question for Kyle, but my understanding is that they have done more work, but that this is likely going to be a work in progress for a while. I know that municipalities are going back to really lobby for some revenue to come out of this for municipalities. So when that happens, they will tweak other things, I'm sure.
I guess, council, do you have a stomach for doing public hearings and whatnot for this in by November? So public hearing over.
My feeling, Cindy, is that November is going to be such a big election with so many issues on the plate that I would personally rather not have this on the table in November.
And this is basically saying whether we opt in to allowing marijuana sales in our town. So it actually has an economic driver, which is if the town votes for it, then businesses could open up in our town sooner. So I think you're right that November is a busy time. We want our electorate to be engaged in this, but when so much else going on, they might not be able to focus. So there might be too many other things going on. However, if the planning, whoever did the work on it feels like it's ready to go, then we provide an opportunity for people to engage in that kind of business if we get it through sooner.
Mhm.
My feeling was always that I wanted to push for the November vote initially because I believe strongly, although it may not be a popular opinion in town with some folks, I don't know, that the university students have a right to participate in this question. And I think that, I was thinking prior to COVID that, doing it in March or June was sort of maybe cutting them out of the process a bit. I mean, sure, they could still participate if they tried, et cetera, et cetera. However, I mean, everything that has been changing and how much people are now comfortable with shifting to doing things remotely, I'm not sure that enfranchisement is as much of an issue to me now as it was before. So although my original preference was always November and I would feel comfortable with November, I also would feel comfortable with March. I don't want to delay it too long, but I think that students and university community members would reasonably be expected to participate through absentee voting.
I agree. I agree with Tom and with Meg. I agree that I think there's way too much going on in November. I think this, giving it its own room for breathing, and also it allows clarity of the actual issue. And there will be, I have no doubt, there will be conversation, discussion about it. And I think it's a great thing to encourage people to get involved and figure out how to vote. If you're not here, if you need to absentee or whatever, I think it's, everyone can vote at every single election, and so I don't have a huge issue with that.
I agree with Megan that I initially was hoping for a November vote, and primarily because people are voting on issues, so that would be something that they could anticipate that it would be on our November ballot. I don't have a problem moving to March. It's so hard to see what's going to happen with, even if with the students and what's kind of what's going on. Even with us, are we going to meet ever? My initial would be, my number one choice would be November for this, to put this on this ballot, because we have done a lot of work on this, and people are waiting for us to figure this out. So, and the students will be back.
Did that give you any more clarity?
I hear a split. I hear March and November. Am I?
I vote November.
Okay.
I agree with Meg and Tom's initial comments. I'm a March person. I think so much is going on, and November's be crazy. And I don't really think economically that 4 additional months or whatever it is going to impact anybody who's going to be doing this business to begin with. So I just don't think that it's quite ready yet, and I don't want to force it. This is an important topic, and our citizens need to be engaged on it.
So I obviously would support the March vote.
And I was just saying that, again, I've always had a preference for November. I would not put up much of an argument about March if that was where the direction of council was going.
Yeah, me as well.
I'm here in March, so yeah, I'm kind of like Meg, where I think that I would like to see this moving forward, but November. I don't even know if the students are going to be back. I mean, they may be back in March, you know, so it's a little bit hard to know when it's going to be the proper vote time.
But it makes some sense to, at our next workshop, to review the planning board comments, finalize the language that you're comfortable with, put an order that says you're going to send it out to referendum in March, and then as we and finalize your language that will go. Then as we get closer, when we get to January, we can start unpacking some smaller pieces and have the public, because you'd have a public hearing as part of your decision to send it to referendum. So you'd end up doing that in probably September. You guys don't tend to like to have public hearings and votes like that in the summer. Does that kind of sound like a plan, so that at least it's all packaged together and people know it's going to be coming?
Yep.
September this year or September the following year?
September of this year for a March. September public hearing and referendum. So you set this up just like you were going to adopt it as an ordinance, but the language instead of adoption is sending it to referendum. So you go through that same public hearing process, you wait a month, and then you send it to referendum the next month. So I think March is a good timeline for you, and I think we can get some good information out for you.
Could we, not to change subjects, but could we do fluoride at the same time?
Well, I wanted to talk to you because I forgot to put that on your work plan. And I've talked to, I think March is going to be tough to do fluoride because we're pairing with VZ, and VZ does not have a local election in March. Their local election is June. We have an election in June, so we could either go in this November or June. I talked with Mark Leonard. His sense is that if the town of Orono has an opinion on it, that the VZ Town Council would likely join our opinion. And if we didn't have an opinion, they would probably look to us for an opinion, if that makes any sense.
I have an opinion. Whereas I was comfortable with November for the marijuana vote because we've done so much education. We have done no education for the fluoride discussion, and I would push it to June.
That's June 2021.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. I think that if you figure people are away for the summer, to start educating in September for a November election, I think is too short of a time period.
So if I'm seeing a lot of nodding heads.
100% agree.
Okay.
Agree.
So there is going to be some legal maneuvering that we have to do with this because we had called an election, we had postponed it to November. I need to figure out if we uncall the election, rescind the election, or if we now have to move it again. I don't know that we can move it that far ahead. But I know there's a process. I just have to get the right one so it's a legal election. And
If anyone can figure it out, Sophie, it is you.
I have some good helpers that can help me with that. So that sounds good. Thank you.
Okay. Evaluating town-owned properties. It looks like we've got a little bit of movement, but personally, like to see a lot more.
Yep.
I agree. I think I had been working on some foreclosed properties, and then when COVID-19 hit, I stopped everything because it felt wrong to be pushing people. But where this has continued on, I would like to start that push again, especially for those properties that are not primary residences, and then to get people with primary residences to come in and hopefully talk to me or talk to me via Zoom. So with the council's blessing, I'd like to start that work again. The question I have staff working on right now for many pieces of town-owned property, is to really digging into some additional deed restrictions to make sure that we have an ability to do something other than just hold it. And they're working on that. The old fire station, we've made some progress with the Boy Scouts. We've got a little bit of final work, and then I will admit I had seen that as a potential to reach out to the Historical Society, because I thought that would just be such a wonderful place for the Historical Society to be able to invite people in. It's a beautiful building. I do have some concerns because it needs some work, and I don't know what our resources are going to look like. So I think it's a bigger discussion. 98 Penobscot Street, we had done some work with that, and then we gave it to Dave to go find us a private developer. He had some nibbles, but nothing has transpired, and everything has gone completely cold. My question for council is, do you want to bring that back for another discussion, or do we want to hold it and wait for the economy to turn around?
I would like to bring it back for discussion. I am getting several community members who are asking about what's happening with it. So even if we just determined after a discussion, it would be better to hold it. But I'm hearing community wants to know and the options that are out there for it.
So if I was to plan for, this seems like it would be finance and operations for the foreclosed properties, and then community development for the bigger town-owned properties. Does that sound fair? If I were to bring back grids with the property, any restrictions, and we could talk about what we should do next with that. Okay.
That would be with multiple properties? Or are we just talking about 98?
I was thinking about all of them,
Okay,
all that I've got on my list,
that's great. I'd like to see these move. I'd like to move forward with these.
because the other questions we have, just planning, our planner has been really tied up with developments, and which is a great thing. But we've got to get back to the sailor discussion as well. But
Sorry.
all right, I have a plan.
Okay. Any more input on that? Nope. All right, moving on to number 2, items necessary to maintain efficient and effective operations. Evaluating operations for making contributions for services more equitable. Sounds like we're not in a position to really move that forward because of the reval, but
I think
open for more discussion.
Yeah, I think so we were talking about primarily nonprofits and having discussions about how their contributions might be more equitable. And in order to do that, we've got to have some values there. And we don't have those yet. We'll have them with the reval. My thought is if we delayed this to start perhaps for FY 21-22, so after April 1, likely more like after July 1, so that we had that data.
Yeah, so basically just have it sit there, but not expect any action.
Yeah, pretty much. And I might put a note so it doesn't seem like we're not doing our work there.
Okay, I'm seeing a lot of nodding heads. So codifying Orono Police Department culture and policy. Based on the notes, I think we're talking about doing those listening sessions before we really address some of the culture and policy. So I think it's a very important and ongoing item. And it sounds like it will be more of a August through October situation.
My hope was that we would be able to move this forward fairly quickly. but not rush it, if that makes sense. At the staff level, we are already making some changes around some internal changes around how we are communicating how to make a complaint. As an example, I'm working on a chief's letter, and we're trying to figure out if it's a chief town manager letter that talks about how important it is for us to understand what's happening in the community, and that we are available to talk, that kind of stuff. But the other piece that's interesting, because Josh has been meeting pretty extensively with community members one-on-one who want more information, and we have reams of policies. You guys have seen them. You know, our use of force policy is probably yay thick. And people, one of the questions that somebody had was, well, you tell us you have these policies, but we can't see them. And we have actually, I went ahead and okayed the purchase of a secondary, an additional component of our Power DMS. You've heard about that, but that's the system that we use to track all of our training for our accreditation and to make sure that we have documentation for the training that we've taken. It's an online system. They have, one of the fears in putting policies out online is that there are all sorts of iterations of policies, and you never want to be behind, because what you publish, and you don't want to publish one PDF and then be operating under another one. And what Power DMS allows us to do is it differentiates between the draft, the adopted that's been trained on and is expected, and it allows a forward-facing component. So anything that has gone through our adoption process, the community can see. And I think it will allow us to link better with the community. It is the best practice process to use for that. And I just gave I made an executive decision, and we bought that. So that we'll be rolling that out to the community. So I think that.
Well, that's basically kind of like a legislative history on the policy.
Well, it will actually give the policy out there. So if it allows it to be searched in a more effective way, it allows us to make sure that we've got the current policy that we're using out there and not one that's old. And it allows, I think, for more community interaction with that policy. It's not just a PDF, I think is what you'll see. This is the method that, although we're no longer with CALIA, that CALIA is advocating. So although we're with Main Leap now, we're still paying attention, and Power DMS is their tool, and we've maintained that. We plan to maintain that so that we.
How would the public get to that? Would they go through our website?
Yep, it will be on the police. The link will be right there on the police page for people to be able to access the policies. And that way people will see how we expect vehicle stops and the expectations around bias or anti-bias. So I think, you know, when you think about all those standard operating procedures that we have, I think it will give people a better sense if they're interested in what the police department's doing. They don't necessarily have to meet with Josh to see what our policy is. And if they see what our policy is and we're doing things that are not based on our policy, then they might feel more comfortable to make the complaint. And the next piece that I'm going to need to work with Belle and Josh on is if we can get a more interactive complaint process to at least generate the complaint. And the serious ones that we need signatures on, which there is a whole process for that, at least we could get them in through the process, maybe with a lower threshold.
And this would be a great resource for us too. I mean, the whole community, but There are many times when things come up and I'm curious about policy and that sort of thing. Just, I mean, in comparison to some of the things that are being blatantly and tragically shown all over, you know, national news and that sort of thing, it leads me to be curious about our, you know, policy on intervention with, you know, among officers or whatever, you know, and so this would be a great resource. Do we have a timeline on this?
I already went ahead and purchased it. I'm not sure that we have it yet. That's a matter of getting it into the system and then understanding how to use it. So we'll have to have some training on it. But I would assume, Sam, in the next few months, we should have that out.
Sophie, the listening sessions with the contracted facilitator, that's also going to need to be funded. Do we have money for funding that?
So I've got 2 pockets of funding. I think that 3 pockets of funding that we could use, Cheryl. One is the council special projects that has about $4,000 in it. The second would be the contingency account. And the third, which has a budget of $10,000 annually. And the third would be my professional services line. So, and that has an annual budget of $26,000, but that's for everything. So
That's
we
plenty.
might end up cobbling a little bit from all 3 of those, depending on how expensive it is.
Okay, thank you.
I wanted to ask council from a procedural perspective, are you happy with the bullet of the listening session, or do you want it as a separate action? You wanted a bullet that goes back to the left. I just didn't know where it is right now, if that's enough.
No, I don't think it is. I think it deserves its own bullet point.
So my suggestion would be that we not necessarily give it its own bullet point, but change the bullet saying, I think we did a lot of codifying. We got a lot of that initial work done, and now we're on the culture piece. And I think that is its own thing. So I think I would take the top part off and just recraft the bullet point to be the second piece.
That makes sense. This felt like it diminished it by having it tucked under that. So.
No, I just didn't want to do 2 things, Sam.
Oh, I hear you. That's a great solution. Thank you.
Any other comments? Seeing none. Moving on to the updating personnel ordinance and policies to reflect modern expectations. Does staff want to move this forward, or does?
So this actually started like 2017, 2016, and it just keeps getting pushed down the road because there is no staff time to do it. I think the way we've been addressing it is, for example, when I had an issue with respectful work environment, I crafted an ordinance revision around that, and council reviewed it, talked about it, and we adopted it. And I think that probably is the way that makes sense for us to kind of continue this on. I just don't see having enough time to do a full-fledged ordinance revision. I think we can make it do with what we've got, and then as time allows, to get small pieces, smaller chunks done. I think there are some pieces that I absolutely need to get done around flex time and what we pay overtime for and what we don't pay overtime for. But I think that if it wasn't part of a mass change, that I could probably get that done this year. But I think that's a staff, that's stalled with staff. There's just not enough.
And Sophie, I just want to say that this is probably like my point that I made earlier, is that I worry about things when we talk about what else to happen. And if your staff is struggling to get these things done, that's why when I messaged you, I said, my email back about it's like, I just don't think we should take anything on because of this situation like this. So I ask all the counselors keep that in mind as we move forward through this.
Sophie, if I could suggest, maybe it could go with the same notation as the evaluating options, so that it doesn't necessarily drop off, but there's a note that says it's ongoing. Or okay, moving on to number 3, continue to review and adapt the town's methods for communicating with its residents. From what I can tell, we've moved this very far forward. And I guess question whether it's an ongoing operating process or if you still want it as a work plan item.
I mean, I think there's probably still, some of the website work is still ongoing, right? I mean, but oh, sorry, I didn't realize my cat was on my shoulder. And I have a box of chickens screaming at me because it's supper time, apparently. Zoo in here. I think that it's become, I mean, I'm the one who kind of hectored everybody to put this on the work plan 3.5 years ago or whenever it was anyway. And I feel like so much work has gone on, and it's not just that the work has been done, but that it seems to really have become part of staff operations. Like, you know, that's the default mode now, is like, how do we communicate with people, which is amazing, which was my goal. So, I mean, I'm happy to take it off the work plan, understanding that it is just sort of part of operations. It only took 3 years to, no, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. We did it. So we finally something off the work plan. Anything else? Anybody else have any comments?
Nope, that's great.
Can I just, as a newbie to this experiencing of social media commentary, I've just never gone through this before. What is our policy for, you know, for people, you know, being I don't know what the word is, but misinformation, or I don't want to say slander. I don't think it's a slanderous situation. But do we have a policy for?
So I'm going to ask Belle to come out from behind the town seal. And I'll start by saying, because, well, what you see from the town is definitely vetted through this office, and Belle and I spend a lot of time talking with each other. All the great work that has happened, Belle has really been shepherding that. She does a phenomenal job. We were at a point a long time ago where we could block messages from being posted. Facebook seems to have changed, and we're not allowed to do that anymore. Belle, we can't.
We can block people. We can't block specific messages. We can delete our post if there is harassing or other illegal speech that we're seeing on the post. Typically what we've only blocked a few people ever, and it's usually around harassing comments that they make either towards town staff or other members of the town of Orono, so residents, counselors, etc. If it's just unkind, we leave it alone. It's free speech. That's allowed. But if it's threatening or really kind of crosses that line where it's, you know, yelling fire in a crowded theater type line, that's where we can block people. And at least for a while, we don't have to see the posts from them.
I think that, and of course, I know who I am, so I'm not too worried about it, and I also have people that are telling me, because I really do not I just don't subscribe to Facebook. But like there was a post about my place of work or the school that I work with, and that doesn't have anything to do. I mean, that could, I don't think it's a potential, impact. But I was really surprised to hear that was something that, that was kind of brought up, and how do I interact with children and all of those things. And it's kind of a reputation kind of thing. I was a little concerned about that because it brought in an aspect of myself that I don't necessarily think it's an important comment to make. And I do have parents in town that I work with, and so does Debbie, and and it's a business. So it was just a little shocking is all.
And Cheryl, I'll go back and I'll review to see what was posted on the town's Facebook page versus what was posted on other Facebook page. I apologize for
I don't,
my
and honestly,
angry eyes.
Belle, I don't know. All I know is, is I have support from, from town members and my friends, and I've been getting emails from, community members who understood, my conflict that night, and, in support. And so I don't know. I don't know if it was a personal Facebook. I don't know if it's a town Facebook. I'm not really sure.
Just so I appreciate that this is a big issue for
Okay.
you.
All right. No, I was just my long story short, do we have a policy, I guess?
The policy in general terms, the social media policy is more governing staff, to be quite honest, and talks about ensuring free speech because unlike a private business, we are not able to simply delete Facebook posts. But the other thing that has come to light is if people post replies on block pages, other people can see them, but we can't anyway, so we can't control that.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, thanks. So, so we've moved off number 3. So number 4 is organize and prioritize town resources needed to continue its current scope of operations over the next 25 years. And we're looking at solid waste. So I think that's probably a big thing, but that might end up with the new committee. I don't know.
I think it might. I think if Coastal Resources of Maine cures its default and everything just clicks back in the way it's supposed to, then we'll move probably to some ordinance language there. If it doesn't, then I think this committee will be probably helping us a little bit with that. My one suggestion that I would make is that infrastructure planning is a huge piece of this 25-year plan. I have asked the town engineer to give us a quote for an infrastructure assessment that would probably take 3 or 4 months to complete, but I think would be a good basis, and it's not just what Rob Yerxa thinks. Well, what Rob Yerxa thinks is really important. I think he would feel more comfortable to have a little bit of technical basis for that. So we've asked for that estimate. That would have to come back to council. My suggestion would be that we would likely want to fund that out of some of the infrastructure reserve because we're going to be dumping more than just dedicated projects in there. So kind of just a thought that it's not just going to be staff coming. And then my thought had been to kind of be able to develop a plan for how we're going to do it, not just that we're going to have a 25-year discussion, but we're going to talk about operations, and this is kind of the schedule that I think would make sense. And then we're going to talk about the infrastructure planning, and here's a schedule that would kind of make sense. And then we'd make some plans when we see all those numbers fit together towards the end. And my sense my hope is that we'll be able to wrap this up before we drop the budget next March. So March, April-ish. But I definitely hear loud and clear from the comments I received from many counselors that this is probably the #1 priority for the coming year.
Great. So I think from the nodding of the heads, it seems like #4, it stays on. And if you could add continue its scope of operations and planning over the next 25 years. Anyone else have anything on #4? Yeah. #5, to begin addressing the following goals of recently adopted comprehensive plan. A, improve Orono's connectivity and safety of the traveling public. I think that that's probably still very important for council to have on there and to move forward. Anyone else?
That's not only important for council to have, but having this will help us with our grant application for funding of the Main Street Sidewalk project, just so you're aware.
So would this be something council wants to move more to the forefront than later spring, or doesn't matter, whenever we get to it? Okay.
I've been looking forward to this, and I think you're talking about the 2014 comprehensive plan. When you say the most recent, that's the last one we had.
Yep.
Yeah. I've been looking forward to this. I know when I came onto council, Sophie said, yes, we know that there's ways to, to do the Main Street, and it's a big project, and it's on the, it's something we have we're planning to do. So that's, as Megan had that experience of 3 years of the webpage, so 3.5 years, I would love to see us address this and not put it to the end.
Okay.
I guess my question is, in putting this here, the plan that I have would be for staff to continue drafting the RFP for engineering services, which Rob tells me is almost done, and to identify some citizens to help with a staff advisory committee. We have some people who have some very strong opinions about Main Street that have engaged us that we want to reach back out to. And then what would come back to council would be kind of the draft plan for then council to give its okay to, scope and budget that you would give your okay to, and then we would continue on. So I'm not seeing more than that, and then the general work with the ACE committee that town staff does. If there's more, we should definitely add it specifically if you want me to be moving something forward for you.
No, I think that makes sense, Sophie. We just, I think people just want to make sure that the sidewalk project continues forward so we can fund when we need to.
I like that moving this. This has been a long-standing thing. I agree with Lori, and so whatever we can do to make this fit and be, get to it as soon as we can, I guess. Whatever, if that makes any sense. I mean, without creating nightmare issues, but this is really important.
Okay. So develop an official map that shows potential future connections, including pedestrian-only connections. I remember that this has been started, or Evan started it, I thought.
Yeah, Evan started a little bit of this work, but there's a lot more that needs to be done, and it's one that's going to require some community meetings and, that planning process. It is on Kyle's list. However, primary on his list is to facilitate development, because we want development. And then he's got a few ordinances that need to get moved through the process, the solar moratorium, and the village and MDR overlay districts. So we need to get those kind of through the pipeline, and then this is something that he can begin work with. I would think we would want to get the Sailor development, that community process through, so he's not running multiple community processes at the same time. That's asking an awful lot.
Well, and I think as we do some of these other projects, these connections may show up as well. Anything else on that bullet? Hearing none. Attract families to Orono by encouraging the availability of affordable housing. Looks like we've been working on some ordinances. I would assume that council still wants to push this forward. A lot of heads yes. Sophie, do you want to add anything?
The only thing that I want to just tag for us to talk about at the end of this discussion is our committee schedule. I have some thoughts and I'd like to talk with you so I can start to lay this in.
So this item will stay on the work plan and we'll move it forward. Address safety and social concerns related to rental properties. Is this still something that council wants to get to? Sounds like it's a lot of staff time.
So I will tell you, staff has put in quite a bit and there's more for staff to do. But I think that it took us a while to understand why we were talking in circles. And I think we finally have understood that it's that we were compartmentalizing all the different types of rental properties and we couldn't make it fit together because we were treating different things differently with different standards in a way that didn't mesh together. So staff has been working towards being able to facilitate a discussion with council about how, in general, rental properties of different classifications impact services, the town, neighborhoods, so that we could council could come up with a general vision, and then we could go back to the table and recraft some of these ordinances that we've all said are important, like rental registration rewrite, the NFPA adoption, and the disorderly property and fee for police schedules, along with the travelers accommodation, the Airbnb, all of that, to try to get it to actually make sense. So I think this is going to be a multi-step process, but I think we need to start by getting, staff needs to understand council's vision before we try to write individual ordinances, because they need to fit and make sense. So my suggestion is that we put this on the agenda. I would suggest that we try to do this after the listening session, simply because law enforcement is going to be part of that. You're going to have multiple meetings. So I thought if we could roll out the staff facilitated conversations in November, December, or January, in that time period, that would make more sense. It's my suggestion, but I work for you.
That sounds good.
Yeah, that sounds like a pretty good timeline, and the listening sessions may bring something up that we hadn't thought about either. So. All right, stay on there. Utilize Orono's outdoor recreation features to attract people to live, work, and play in Orono. So participate in a regional effort to improve trail connectivity in order to create a destination for outdoor recreation, hiking, biking, and paddling enthusiasts. I think we've been making good progress on this, but I would imagine it should stay on the work plan.
I think our next step is to go out and knock on doors, and we really are not comfortable doing that right now. So I think when we get to a point where it's comfortable to knock on doors or to have community meetings, where people actually come together to talk about our thoughts. We would kind of plan to do that, but everything is all set to go. All the base work has been done.
So Sophie, I know I had emailed you or messaged you a while back asking about the map that we had seen in that committee meeting. I've now had like probably half a dozen different conversations with people. Obviously the weather's nice. People have been cooped up for months. They're trying to get out, saying, well, wait, well, what trails are connected now and how does it, so is it possible for us to get a scan of that map, or do you not want to put to the work while we're still working on it, or?
So the issue that I have is that what you see on that map, a lot of that was dotted, and the dotted is the work that we're working on. But it brings up the point, and I'm talking to the SEAL right now, that what would be very good is if we could put front and center the link to the land trust, because the land trust maps are really outside of the major Sklar Park and the Jeremiah Coburn Forest and the Stillwater Trail. Outside of that, really the bulk of our trails are land trust trails. So, and they've got some nice maps. So perhaps Belle could, and her team could work on getting that out there. Oh, she says she can do it.
Okay, so that will stay on there and keep working on it. And develop plans to improve or construct recreation, open space, and amenities, including playgrounds. It looks like we've started this with some of the neighborhoods, and again, probably can't get together because of the COVID, but we'll continue to move it forward.
And I think this lives in two places, Cindy. I think it lives here to talk with the neighborhoods, but I also think it needs to be part of our discussion about infrastructure planning and kind of what priority does that get in the general scope of things for funding.
So will you notate that it could also be part of prior 25-year planning one? Awesome. Anybody else have anything on that? Nope. Okay, so now we've moved, that's what we have on our plate, that we're moving from FY19 to FY20. And now we are looking at proposed, these are proposed council forums. So most of them, it looks like, got postponed because of COVID. And is there anything that anybody doesn't want on there, or everybody comfortable with leaving these things on there to potentially happen when we can get back together again? Leaving it together, I guess. Okay. So moving on to previously discussed and agreed to for FY 2021, building a relationship between the town and the Penobscot Nation. That I can answer that that's kind of died with the COVID, so I will try and resurrect that and see what happens. Facilitated listening sessions and action planning regarding Orono Police Services. I think we're slating that for August, September, October, as earlier stated. Formalizing an annual plan for recognizing June as Pride Month. I think we're on the way for that. Would that come up in a community development type arrangement? Yes.
So my plan had been, which just because it's my plan doesn't mean it stays. We had talked about me working with the comp plan and community development chairs to identify a few people to kind of help staff create a draft proposal that would then come to council. My assumption is that that would come through the community development committee. We've done some joint community development comp plan committee work, but I think this one is really it needs to be influenced by comp plan, but I think it's more community development, if folks are okay with that. So my hope, especially if our goal is to try to get the waiver process started, Rob would need some action by council in September to give him the basis from which I can write the letter that Cindy would sign that would end up going to DOT to start that process.
Okay. That works for me. Financial and capital planning and stewardship. So that would relate back to the 25-year planning as well. So, okay.
Question with this one, and maybe it's a Tom and Cindy question, but is this a finance and operations process? Is it a workshop, or is it something completely and totally different that we only meet for that purpose?
Unmuted.
There you go.
I actually think that it would be good to have it as an item, a single meeting item, a single item meeting there. It could be a workshop, but I think would be something that really is, we need to dig into and spend time on.
So what I'd like to do is to work with you as the finance committee chair, Tom, to kind of divide this up into manageable parts, because I would think one meeting won't do it. So we
Right.
want to kind of divide it up and get an outline. And maybe we could talk about that so I can lay that in. I've got a little tool I want to share with you all that will hopefully allow us to put something on the wall to actually follow. So it's not just words on a page, but something graphically that will lead us through this process.
Neat.
Sounds like a plan. So the next items are feedback from council for FY21 council work plan. So these are items that are not currently on our work plan, but we need to discuss whether we would like to put them on there. So the first was the financial planning related, and then community discussions related to police services, formal plan for analyzing Pride Month, and finishing up FY20 plan items. So those items, I think we've all addressed previously today.
Yep.
The adoption for proclamations, I think that could go in workshop. I don't know if that needs to be a full plan item or just workshop, but I'm not sure what others think.
So I would actually open this up a little bit more, Cindy, to the legal advice we got from Sue Pilgrim at MMA about government speech, and talk about how she suggested that the town have some guidelines for how it decides how to use its government speech. And I think proclamations are part of government speech. So that might be as simple as me working to draft a policy that could then go to finance and operations and up through that way. Does that make some sense?
Yep.
Okay, I will do that.
Another item is review and discussion to discuss the environment for the LGBTQIA people and other residents who are members of often marginalized groups. So Lori, what would you see this as? Are you looking for a workshop on it, or? You need to unmute, Lori.
All right, I'm unmuted. So I'm looking for where, okay, review, this is review and discussion of suggestions, Councilor Osher. Oh, so yes, so back when I started on town council, Sophie mentioned that there was some organization that gave us a rating that wasn't, that she didn't think really evaluated us based on our merits. The rating was low, and she thought that our services and support for LGBTQIA people was not being well represented. So I reviewed, it was the Human Rights Campaign, Municipal Equality Index. I have reviewed their rubric and proposed ways that we might be able to increase our numbers. And in fact, Sophie was correct. There were many points that we weren't given because although they didn't state it explicitly, it appeared that if we did not have information about our services or healthcare provision for our staff on our webpage, that they did not give us points for it. And I talked with Matt Moonen, the executive director of Equality Maine, because of course the way in which they evaluate smaller towns impacts all of the towns in Maine except for Portland. And so of 8 of the 9 towns being evaluated were missing points in part because of their process. So I'm willing to work on that continuously with Matt, writing letters to the HRC about the ways that they're just not serving our smaller town. However, there were other ways that we weren't getting points because we were not doing things. Now, having all of our wonderful Pride activities this month, and having newspaper articles about them, as long as those articles get posted on the website, which is another communication piece that I haven't been involved in how we manage our website. But I did say that when I proposed about 2.5 years ago what kinds of things the town could do, one was having press about what we're doing and putting it on the website. So back to, thank you for putting this on the work plan. There's 2 pieces. One is objectively, how do the people in our community feel about what we're doing? And since all of the flags and the art and the painting on the windows, we've had lots of positive feedback on our webpage, and it's been fabulous. So, and then how HRC evaluates us is really a separate thing. However, their rubric gave us a suggestion of one way we could gain points, but it also seemed to me a fabulous way to get information from the community on how we're doing, and have, much as Cheryl described in this subcommittee for the environment, if you had an ongoing meeting of a committee, you get the points from HRC, but also you have an ongoing dialogue of the people in the community that consider that a very important thing to keep track of over time. And then they report up to a committee of the council and then it can be if there's something that needs to be an action item of the council, we're made aware of it, and it doesn't take as much staff time as if and the staff doesn't have the same expertise as people in the community who wanted to evaluate how we're doing. When I originally proposed it, the HRC called it a civil rights committee or commission. Now we're talking also about how our town is doing in trying to decouple racism from our culture. And since all of America has to work on that, all politics is local, so it's important that we work on that locally. So maybe these could be combined. The same discussion we had that in August, we're going to be talking about how we get the voices of the community to tell us about how the police are doing. Maybe over time, these could be a project of maybe as what Cheryl said, a 1-year trial to see if it's something that's going to be valuable and is not a drag on us, but is a net positive and has community participation. So there's my long story to say, I'd love to see us do something. I don't have anything as fleshed out as what Cheryl presented today for the Environment Committee, and I'm sure that I could do some homework and find out about how some of these committees that other municipalities have are working. But right now it's just something, again, it was less than a paragraph I proposed before, but it seems that we're coming around to that might be a useful thing for us to do moving forward.
Well, I think that this is something that, we can address. Working maybe with the group that's already working on Pride Month might be something that we can do. I'm not too excited about making an action step for a particular for the particular HRC campaign. I would like to make it more Orono centered, not necessarily because HRC told us to do this. But I think we've got a lot of things on the plan that may develop this further as well. I think that after the listening sessions, we may see that there is another committee created, and I think this could be incorporated in that as well.
Indeed.
Open for, go ahead.
Sure. I think no, I agree with your point of not jumping through hoops provided by this, but I think the HRC provides an incredibly valuable resource as far as a lens for us to be able to look through things and see how we are being perceived. And so, and there is value to this. I saw that our scorecard, several people sent it to me to see, and it was kind of, it was a bit eye-opening in an unpleasant way. And I think part of that is not that it's, not that there is per se a hostile environment here. I mean, but it's just a matter of we can do more. We can learn from this. I think it's important to look at this as a tool where we can learn from this and see if there are ways we can make our stance clearer, make it more obvious. Because on the surface, it doesn't look terribly impressive. At least it didn't, 5 weeks ago. And I think there are things we could do now to maybe learn from this to move in the right direction. Not necessarily jump through those hoops, but I think there is some incredible value to be gleaned from this, if that makes sense.
Like this, Lori, do you see this fitting into, like, further down on the list, we have creation of a civil rights or social justice committee. Would that be something that that civil rights committee would take on as a task?
Well, yes, thank you. Basically, I just reviewed the rubric because Sophie suggested it, and I didn't even know that Human Rights Campaign evaluated municipalities until she mentioned it. So, and it seemed to me back then that was something that we could do, and we had this academic town, and so basically the HRC was saying, if you meet once a month and you have movies that are, or guest speakers that talk about diversity, then you get the points. And I'm thinking, I don't want the points. I want the meetings. I want the gatherings. I want to meet other people who want to see that movie. I think that it would be, as Artsapalooza is a net positive, I think that it would be a net positive. And now here we are realizing that there's a lot of ways that we don't see how our town, how we're not helping our town improve and be better. So I only brought it back up because there was this discussion that we should do something if we're following what Racial and Economic Justice, the group that organized the BLM march in Bangor, said. They were requesting some kind of committee, council, community meeting in Bangor that had people of color on the committee evaluating all of Bangor's ordinances, culture, police, whatever. And so if we take from people who are trying to improve municipalities, who are members of a minority group, and I'm a member of a minority group, I think that we can take the suggestions from those groups and try to move forward. So no, I'm not saying it would be a separate group. I just brought it back up because it was our time to talk about the work plan. It was something I had done a lot of work on a long time ago. I wanted to reintroduce it while we were thinking about all of these things about how we can make our town better for our, all members of our community and welcoming. And thank you, Sam, for saying that there's points. Like one of the points was, back then, it was just me on the committee, on the council. It said, back then, 2.5 years ago, you got 5 points, and our numbers are like at 30 right now, right? So you get 5 points, was a significant amount when you're starting from 30 for having an out LGBTQ elected official. And the only way you need to identify that is to have it on the webpage. But our webpage doesn't have any bios for our town councilors, so there was no way to put that on the webpage. The webpage was being evaluated long before I got onto the council, and so there's an example. Now we have 2 out LGBTQ elected officials. So that brings our numbers up pretty high without a lot, except for that we'd have to change the webpage, and that's not in my wheelhouse. I'm, someone else's, Megan's on that committee, and the staff is doing that. So so back to, thank you, Cheryl. I just brought it up because we're having this discussion, and I think that a committee like this that includes many people who represent the diversity of our town, are folks that are in the minority, that would be useful. We don't, and I'm not wedded to the name being calling the Civil Rights Committee.
So
It's
that's
the intent, not
that's
the
a
limit.
yes to Cheryl's question then.
The answer to Cheryl's question is it doesn't have to be separate committees. It would be probably better if it were the same, and I'm not wedded to the name. It's the intent.
So would a work plan item make sense to say, review and adapt the town's methods for conveying, communicating, and advocating for LGBTQIA folks, or probably broader, not doing really well with wordsmithing this evening, but more of a human rights, methods for evaluating human rights projects in.
Yeah, Cindy, I really think that, I think that for me personally, I want it to be about Orono as Orono. And I'm an HRC advocate, I'm a member, everything. However, I find that their numbers are very skewed. If you live in a city that has got money to pay for a lot of things, your score goes up. Does not make them an effective for LGBTQ communities. That's not what I think it's about. I can easily look out my door and see Orono as a place. Look at any other town around us. They don't have what we have here. So I'm saying that I would do it for our town, but I don't want the HRC as the indicator about whether or not we did a good job. Because I got elected as a gay male, I don't want 5 points for a community because I got elected. And I'm going to be very clear about that. So I'm all in, but I want it to be about, like, why is Orono Orono? We are Orono simply because we are people who understand many different cultures, and we embrace all different cultures, and that's what we should be about.
Yeah, you said it much better than I did, Terry. That's kind of, I'm all for the process of this, but I don't want the work plan item to say get more points. I would like to make Orono better by doing these items.
I agree with all that, but again, going back to my initial point, I think we can learn from things in here without not jumping through hoops, not trying to rack up points, not trying to win this great cricket match or whatever it is. It's a matter of what's the right thing, and are there things in here that we can learn from and say, oh, this is something that we can improve on. And also, even though many of us are incredibly entitled and are privileged to be exposed to this and to support this and embrace this, that's not necessarily the case with all of Orono. You know, I mean, I think there's a lot that we don't necessarily see that maybe isn't quite as supportive. I think whatever we can do, I mean this in a positive way, not a bean counting way, not a random point kind of way, but to really move forward. So I'm in agreement, but I just want to.
Sam, it sounds like you're kind of, I mean, I think Cindy's saying the same thing. It's like, it's not, if we do the things,
right.
I don't care if we do it in the way that HRC recognizes to give us points. So if we, if the town's Facebook page is reposting all of these news articles about Pride Month and showing the pictures and the write-ups about the sculptures, if the town's Facebook page is doing that and connecting with residents in that way, then that's fine with me. I mean, sure, it could be put on the website, but the point is not, does HRC go to our website, not our Facebook page, and give us 5 points for that? Like, I don't want to get bogged down in jumping through the hoops of like how we show that we do these things to a particular organization. But like Cindy's saying, like, let's do the things, and yeah, let's maybe use their information as a guide, but making sure that we prioritize giving them the information in the way that gives points isn't as high a priority for me.
I'm not even talking about points. No, I understand that. All I'm saying is we can learn a lot about how we are perceived by using other people's eyes instead of our own. You know what I mean?
We're all saying the same thing.
I know, no, exactly. So, I mean, I'm just trying to like clarify that I'm not saying we need to do this, but I'm saying we can learn about how we're being perceived from the outside by looking at what the outside sees.
The only further thing I would say about this work plan item is like, I'm still just looking for more clarity. It's kind of just like an amorphous kind of free floating.
Would it be would everybody be okay with me trying to craft some language for this item to be put on the work plan, and then when we can look at it for final adoption, but we can have some language in front of us to do that with?
I think that's.
Yes, that would be great. Thank you, Cindy.
Okay. All right.
Can I just say one thing? Because the Human Rights Campaign has been just a huge frustration to me for many years. And Cindy worked through it with me and sent letters. And but I just want to respond, Sam, to this idea that it's eye-opening. It's not correct. It's not that it's eye-opening. It is not correct. We have non-discrimination language. We don't allow discrimination based on gender identity. There's all sorts of stuff in here that just is not correct. And I just want to make it clear that it's not just that, wow, it's eye-opening that we're not doing it. It's that it's not correct.
No, I get that. And I know we've been talking about this, and I'm going to keep talking about it just because I really don't feel my point's being understood. For somehow, someone is missing this point if it's incorrect, which it is. And I look at this and I see zeros on different things. I have it right here. And I know that's not the case. So what do we do? What do we have to do to make that? And again, not just jumping through hoops, but make it more visible. I don't know. Is there a way we can do that? So to get that information out there,
So when I looked into this, I didn't look at our Facebook page, and I don't know what our Facebook page was doing. And Sophie's right that there's ways in which they, because of our insurance in part, so every town in the state that has the same insurance that we do for our employees, we don't get the credit for, the way in which we're being supportive of them. However, of the 9 cities in our municipalities in our state, we're much lower, and some of those things are things that will already be, if they're going to count, which I don't care that they count it. It's that I guess I'm a bit of a historian. I only learned about this because Sophie mentioned to me that this was to her.
So not to close it down, but we're getting on 2.5 hours here. So why don't I try and develop some language that then council has something to put in front of them, and then we can develop it, flesh it out. Brain starting to go.
Yep.
I think the next item was on solar and electricity, and I think that's, we've talked about that with the Energy Committee.
Yep.
So I think that's going to be on there. Progress of the consultant to building on the footprint, I think that also could go to the committee. Social Justice Committee, I think after the listening sessions, that will be something that we can look to develop. So I think the listening sessions already puts this on the work plan.
So can I just go back to the update on progress of the consultant that was going to evaluate the town's buildings and energy use? I think there's been a miscommunication here. We had last year talked about having an energy audit done. We had that on the FY21 capital plan, and that got moved during the budget process to FY22. So there is no money to fund any consultant until FY22 at minimum.
Thank you. I had an emergency revisit when I should have been on a town council workshop for the budget, and it was that night. So I'm sorry I did not read the minutes after. I just realized that you guys must have talked about this when I wasn't, the one meeting I missed because I had somewhere else to be. And so I just put it in there because I didn't know what happened to it. I remembered that it was going to be on the budget, and then I didn't see it. So thanks for letting me know that it got moved forward.
Okay. So I think we've addressed those things and put them into the work plan. Suggestions for staff on quarterly updates to council on evaluation project, that can go under the staff. monthly review and financial reports and tax sewer collections. That usually do that in finance and operations anyways, right? Updates on operations, stormwater, landfill compliance efforts under finance, and final push for.
So, Cindy, that might be something that a new committee could work on as well.
Yeah.
It's frequent updates to the stormwater landfill.
Great. So I think those are great suggestions. I think that they're kind of intermingled with some of the other things that are already on the work plan.
Mhm.
And
Great.
I think we talked about the foreclosed property already.
So again, since I missed that meeting, I guess I must have missed the discussion of the solar. I thought that there was a suggestion that we might buy solar power instead of installing it in our own town. But I haven't heard about that in a while, so I wanted to check in on that.
Okay. Is that something you could give us an update on, Sophie, in the next meeting? Unless you can do it quickly, not, but that's.
No.
Just a matter of time in the day. We have had discussions with Revision Energy about entering into net metering contracts. We need to reach out to the school and to the water district because it's something that the three can do together. And I think at this point there is more than just Revision Energy in the game. So likely what we'd need to do is we'd have to do an RFP. I will tell you right now, I don't have the technical expertise to put a 15 to 20 year RFP out for electricity. Essentially, it's a power purchase agreement. So we would need some help with that. But at this point, with as many folks in the game, I think you'd have an issue with your procurement process if you just went to one place. So I think an RFP would be the next step. We probably, I don't know, but we probably would need some help writing that.
Okay. We'll put that on a committee agenda. So if everyone is comfortable with the one addition and the revisions that I think Sophie has been taking notes on, I'm hoping, we'll republish the work plan and try and adopt it. Is everybody okay with July? Because I think June is too quick. For the July 13th committee meeting, or council meeting, we could adopt it. Okay. Is there anything for a brief town manager's report?
Just a brief report. We continue to get a lot of feedback about Gould's Landing and Neto Savoy Park. I would just clarify that the park is not closed. It is a little less than half the parking is set up for people who are using the boat launch, and the rest of it is permit parking with permits going to residents. I have reached out to Alan Netto, who was instrumental in putting the making the park, of the creation of the park, and I have a meeting scheduled with him tomorrow. The one thing that is concerning me a little bit is I think whatever we do needs to be inclusive of, well, not inclusive is a bad word, but the rule needs to be for everybody. And if we're going to make a delineation between resident and non-resident, or taxpayer / resident and non-taxpayer resident, that makes sense to me. When we start getting into, we'll let non-residents use it but pay $50 for a parking ticket, parking permit, it really feels like we're starting to say, if you're wealthy enough to be able to afford $50, you can come and park. And that is concerning to me, because that to me is creating a message that I'm not sure Orono would want to send. So when people are getting individual counselors are getting asked, could there be an exception for me because I've done this for so long and I want X? I'm really not comfortable with individual exceptions for people based on who you know. So I want to have a conversation with Alan. My understanding is that he, you know, based on the feedback he's left on Facebook, I think he has some concerns. And I'd like to try to come up with a better solution, but I'm not sure that we're going to be able to make everybody happy because we've got residents out by the landing that are very happy right now. And we've got some residents from Orono that are very happy right now. We have a whole bunch of people who aren't from Orono that aren't happy. And I think council's gonna have to give some thought to its vision of the policy, because we are stepping way outside operations now, and try to decide what it wants to see. I would like to have a chance to chat a little bit with Alan first and then come back to council for more discussion. Leave it the way it is for right now.
So could we put it on maybe the June 29th for discussion if you've gotten more
Yep.
action?
Yep.
Step.
I think that's good. Just an update to let you know that the EnvisionNet TIF, all of that paperwork has gone to DECD and they are reviewing it. We've asked for an expedited review because there is some effort happening out there that might need some childcare, which is part of the TIF allowable expenses. And just want to send a thank you out to the Housing Foundation that we're in the middle of COVID-19, and just like clockwork, we got our payment in lieu of taxes, our donation, and that was very much appreciated. We'll send a letter out tomorrow for that. The last thing I have is I wanted to have just a brief discussion with counselors about our plans moving forward. You know, it's not my decision as to how you guys meet. That is your decision. And I feel like you guys have been looking at me for guidance on that. And my sense from my perspective, although we're moving to 50 people that can gather, that's not really for indoors. And we can really only have 5 people in council chambers right now. And it seems to me that we're garnering quite a lot of people following the Zoom platform right now. If council is comfortable hanging in there with us, I'd like to continue this through July and August, and then evaluate in August for September. My thought though is I'd like to start committee meetings up in July. So I'd like to have a comp plan committee meeting on July 6th would be the schedule. Does that work?
Are you talking about in person or on Zoom? Oh, okay.
Zoom.
Yeah, I mean, I'm fine with getting back to I mean, I want to get back to the committee. There's so much stuff to do. And you're right. I think that people are growing comfortable with this format, and maybe we have a little bit more engagement than we do when we're meeting in chambers.
What day is June 6th? July 6th, I don't have a calendar. Is it a Thursday?
July 6th is a Monday.
Oh, it's a Monday. Okay.
Yeah, I would be thinking that I would stay with the regular schedule, which is a Monday, Thursday. We kind of bounce back and forth between those 2 dates. And my other question is whether you are okay at 4 or if you want to bounce these later, or what works for you.
I like 4.
I won't be available on the 6th, but you don't need me to have a party.
Okay.
I like 4.
4? I'm seeing lots of 4s are okay. Okay.
4. The 6th works for me.
Four works.
So I don't want to create any kind of controversy on council. 4, or are we're okay with 4, or
Yes.
we're going 4? Okay.
Yes. Okay. Or were you saying, did you mean the time or the date?
the time, 4 p.m.
4 is good. I think Lori may have meant 6. She's available on the 6th, but I don't.
Yes, I'm available on the 6th.
Oh,
Four is,
okay.
sorry
okay.
for the lack of clarity.
So, we okay with council meetings at 4?
Yes.
Okay. So what I will do, I'd like to still schedule an August council meeting, and if we don't need a formal council meeting, perhaps we could put a workshop, or we've got plenty of work to do, I guess, is my point. We could begin to work through this, our
Okay.
efforts. Does that work?
Yeah.
All right.
Yep.
I will work with Nancy to get a schedule out, and I will also look to post a schedule on the website so people know where to find us.
Good.
Thank you all very
everybody.
much.
Thank you, everybody, for your hard work. We got through it.
Have a nice holiday.
Thank you.